Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Creative Herd Studios. Today we are going to be looking at a lesson on texture. So let's get started. As usual, we have to start with our objectives. It's always important to know why it is that we're doing the lessons that we're doing. So let's talk about what those objectives are. The first objective is that you guys are going to be able to define and recognize texture when you see it. Objective 2, you're going to be able to distinguish between implied texture versus actual texture, and we'll take a look at what that means. Objective 3 for this lesson is the creation part of it again. So remember, we always create something in art. Your third objective is that you're going to draw a textured hand, and you are going to include 5 different textures in that textured hand. All right, so let's talk about texture a little bit, okay? That's the first objective that we have, is for you guys to understand what texture is, to be able to define that and to be able to identify it when you see it. So texture just simply refers to the way something feels. If you think of textiles or textural, it's all dealing with tactile, with the way something feels. So we're not talking emotionally, we're talking by touch. You may have noticed that today I have worn a corduroy overshirt, and a corduroy has a certain type of ribbed feeling to it. It's very soft to the touch. I am also wearing my shark tooth necklace, just kind of for fun. This is a prehistoric shark tooth necklace, so we're talking 65 million plus years old. A shark tooth is very sharp. Okay, so it has a very sharp edge, and that is a texture as well. All right, while we're talking about texture, I also want to show you some real life examples of texture besides my shirt that I was wearing and my sharp shark's tooth. I have my little friend here. He's little now, he'll be really big later on. If you guys looked at my Bitmoji classroom, you have already been introduced to Mick. Here we have Mick. He is a sulcata tortoise. Sulcata tortoises have nice texture on them. If you look at his shell, he has this little ridged pattern. He has a little bit of pyramiding. He kind of had some pyramiding when I got him, and I'm trying to correct that. He also has these awesome leg textures right here. He doesn't like me messing with his legs. He needs a bath, so he's a little bit dry right now, but he's got some rough, scaly texture going on right here. You can kind of see that. I'm gonna bring him up a little bit closer. Let's see if I can get him in there. So maybe that view's in. I don't know if I'm blurring out or not. But he's an excellent example of texture. He's looking at the camera like, what are you doing? We're hoping he doesn't, use the restroom on me. So this is Mick. All right, I'm gonna go take Mick back to his little tank. We have a tank that we keep Mick and his brother Oog in. And eventually, just kind of for a fun fact, eventually this little guy here is gonna be huge and weigh about 150 pounds when he gets fully grown. So yeah, there's Mick. Ready? Let's go. Okay, so I'm doing something a little bit different, and I've decided I'm gonna go ahead and take you outside so that you can see a little bit more textures that you would see out in natural life. So if we look down here, you'll see the sunflower. And the sunflower actually has really nice texture. So the petals are kind of soft, but you have this rough kind of bumpy texture in the middle. I don't know if you can see that really well. Kind of angling it a little bit so you can see some of that bumpy texture. And that would be a place that you would actually use texture in artwork. Okay, so one of the things that we have also that has nice texture are the trees. Look at that bark, okay? The bark is an excellent example of texture, that really rough texture that's on there. And so that's an excellent thing that you can use as an example of texture as well. And we have plenty of that out here. This is a mesquite tree. That's all I have out here, mesquite trees with the thorns and everything. It's so much fun. All right, so here I am by my crepe myrtle. It's a baby crepe myrtle, and I don't have a very green thumb, but we're trying. You'll notice that on the crepe myrtle, you have this nice, soft, ruffled texture. Try to get a good view of that. That's a nice texture that you can look at. So the way that it kind of ruffles out, that could be a texture too. All right, another texture that you guys might be quite familiar with is furry texture. This is Oreo. He's not even really our cat. He just ended up out here, and it's one of those, he adopted his humans. I was going to show you Charm, who actually is our cat, but Charm was being terrorized by my father's dog, so we don't get to see him. So Furry texture is another really good texture that you can use. It's very soft, very fluffy. You have the little individual hairs. And you can have short fur, you can have long fur, which is more of a hairy texture, kind of like this mess on top of my head would be a hairy texture. So there's lots of different textures that you guys can use. I'm getting a lot of love right now. Lots of different textures. You say hi, Oreo? Say hi. All right, so that's a lot of textures that I've shown you. Don't bite me. All right, so now that I've shown you some actual textures, let's talk about the difference between actual texture versus implied texture. I really want you guys to understand the differences there. And when we're dealing with art, there's a lot of times that we deal with implied texture versus actual texture. And that's what we're going to be doing with your hands. So let's talk about that. Here we can see an example of actual texture sitting right next to simulated texture. You may not realize what you're looking at, but the picture on the left is a reference photograph. So that would be actual texture of brick. That's the actual wall. The picture on the right is a painting of that same wall. And so there you're seeing simulated or implied texture. It's not real texture, it's just made to look real. All right, let's take a look at this charcoal drawing. This would be a perfect example of implied texture. If I was to touch this picture, I wouldn't feel any of the textures. It only looks like it has that texture. So this artist used a smooth texture by creating gradual changes between light and dark, like our shattered values. The rough texture was created by frequent changes between light and dark, and that gives it like a less smooth appearance. As if we were to touch it, we would feel that roughness. But again, this is implied texture because it's not real. We can't really feel it. It just looks like it feels that way. Okay, so now that you've learned about implied texture and actual textures, what we're going to do for this first exercise, which is part 1 of the texture project, and I'll have more information later on this week for part 2, which is going to be the actual project that we do. But we're going to do this exercise for the next couple of days. By the end of the week, you should see the final project that I want you guys to do. And we're going to draw our texture hand. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to demonstration mode, and I'm going to let you watch me draw a textured hand so that you can see what it is that I want you to do. Now, when you do your textured hand, make sure that you don't do exactly what I do. I really want you guys to be creative. You might even use some of the textures I use, but I'd like to see you draw that in a different way. It's not about copying me. It's about learning techniques to, or exploring techniques even to come up with those textures. So that's really important for me that you don't just copy what I do. Try and come up with your own stuff and see how creative you can get with that. You're going to want to use some values when you're creating your textures that will help make certain textures pop, and I'll talk more about that when I do the demonstration. The first thing we're going to do for this project is we are going to trace our hand. I went ahead and kind of put my bracelets in because it looked funny anyway. We're going to have 5 textures in here. And so we're going to go ahead and separate up that space however you decide to do it. I just sort of took it down to the wrist, but separate it up into 5 sections. On each finger, you are going to write a different texture. So my textures were furry, scaly, bumpy, sharp, and then I came in and used rough for my thumb. So I'm going to write the word rough. So let's start with the texture furry. I'm coming along the side here and I'm using line to create a short furry type texture. And so you're going to sort of, you don't want to draw every single hair, but you are going to definitely draw a lot of line work. And then I'm coming in and using values to really sort of accentuate that furry look. My next finger is going to be scaly. And I like to think of it kind of like a dragon scale or even a spiky scale. If you remember, the front of Mick's legs had those overlapping spurred scales. And I do this by creating a sharp U, not quite a V, but sort of a sharp U overlapping. I come back in with my values and I create nice dark values where they are overlapping and let it fade to the tip. And that gives it a nice textural look there. The third finger, I'm gonna come in and do the bumpy texture. So I like to think of it like, imagine it being covered in bubble wrap or something. So I want it to look like circular shapes. But as I go to the ends of the finger, or the edges of the finger, I sort of squish those circles down and they look almost like ovals because you're looking at that bump from an angle. And then I'm gonna come in on my sharp finger, and one of the sharpest things I can think of, and it's actually quite popular in design right now, is a cactus. And so I'm gonna make that finger look kind of like a cactus. So even though the whole finger doesn't look sharp, I'm gonna come in and I'm going to add those spines. And when I add those spines, that's gonna be the sharp element of that finger. So here I'm adding a few of these spines coming in. You guys can do that however you want to. I want to create some nice values in between all those ridges. And I'm going to go back and add some values to the bumps. I should have already done that, but I'm going to add some values now to really make those pop. Let your shading help make it look 3D. Now for rough, I'm going to go back to that bark texture that we looked at earlier in the video. And I'm going to make it just kind of random rough lines coming through. And then I'm really going to use my value and my line work to create that rough texture in here. You can sort of see how I come in and I create darker values around each of the shapes. And then I sort of come in with random rough lines within to create that rough look. So there you have it. All right, so here is your challenge. You need to make a hand similar to mine with your 5 textures. Use your values and your line work to help those textures show up. Okay, so again, if you are an online learner, I do expect you to do this project. I do expect you to add this project to Google Classroom so that I can see what you are doing. It is very important that I see your artwork. I have to see your artwork. If I don't see your artwork, I don't know if you're doing your artwork. And because you're not in class with me to show me, I can't give you a grade until I see it. So you've got to make sure that you are attaching that artwork to the Google Classroom assignment, okay? And that goes for you guys that are in person too. We've already talked about this. You have to attach a picture of your drawing so that I have that documentation there. I don't take anything home with me. I don't stay at school really late. I've got too many things I have to do with my kids at home. So it's really important that you are attaching a picture of your artwork to every assignment that you turn in on Google Classroom. We're going to do things a little bit differently from now on. We've got still some issues with kids not really knowing where to go to turn in their work or when to turn in their work. So what I'm going to start doing from this point forward is I'm going to post the video at the beginning of the lesson, but I'm also going to attach your self-evaluation form. And I think there's still some confusion about what that self-evaluation form is. When you get the video, you have that point to start working on your work. These lessons are designed to take 3 days or 5 days or 10 days, however long I give you to your due date. It's not a last minute thing. It is a work a little bit at a time every day so that you can have a nice finished artwork at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and attach that self-evaluation form, and I'm going to have a due date marked on this assignment with the video and the attached self-evaluation so that you have a better idea. I want to make sure things are as clear as possible for you guys. I'm not out to confuse anybody, and I feel like we still have some kids that are confused. Some of you guys are doing a great job. Keep it up. The rest of you guys, we'll get it figured out, okay?